For thousands of years, humans have been remarkably good at turning wild animals into partners. Wolves became dogs, wild cattle became cows, horses carried us across continents. Even animals that once feared humans eventually became part of human civilization. But one animal seems like it should have joined that list a long time ago. Elephants. They're intelligent, they're strong, they can learn complex tasks. Throughout history, humans have used them for transportation, construction, warfare, and labor. Ancient armies marched with them. Kingdoms depended on them. Entire civilizations built relationships with them. Which raises a strange question. If elephants have been helping humans for thousands of years, why didn't they become domesticated? At first glance, elephants seem like perfect candidates. They're among the smartest animals on Earth. They can recognize themselves in mirrors. They understand cooperation. They form deep social bonds. They remember locations for decades. Some studies suggest they even mourn their dead. These are exactly the kinds of traits humans often value in domesticated animals. So what went wrong? To understand the answer, we first need to understand something important. Most people think taming and domestication are the same thing. They aren't. A tame animal is an individual that learns to tolerate humans.
A domesticated animal is something very different. Domestication happens when an entire species changes genetically across many generations. The animals begin inheriting traits that make them easier to live with, easier to breed, and easier to control. Dogs are domesticated. A pet wolf is tame. That difference changes everything. And elephants fall into a very unusual category. Humans have successfully tamed elephants for thousands of years, but we never truly domesticated them. In fact, nearly every working elephant throughout history was captured from the wild. That sounds surprising. Imagine if every horse used today had to be caught from nature instead of bred on farms. The entire system would collapse. Yet that's essentially how elephants were managed for centuries. Wild elephants were captured, trained, and put to work. But generation after generation, they remained wild animals. The question is why? Part of the answer comes down to time. Elephants grow up incredibly slowly. A cow can reproduce within a few years. A horse matures relatively quickly. An elephant may take more than a decade before producing offspring. And that's only the beginning. Female elephants have one of the longest pregnancies in the animal kingdom. Nearly 2 years. 22 months. By comparison, humans take 9 months.
A dog takes roughly 2. An elephant requires almost 2 full years just to produce a single calf. This creates a massive problem for domestication. Selective breeding depends on generations. The faster generations occur, the faster humans can shape a species. Dogs evolved alongside humans across thousands of generations. Elephants simply don't provide enough opportunities. Every breeding decision takes decades to reveal its results. What might take a dog breeder 10 years could take an elephant breeder half a century. But even that isn't the biggest obstacle. The real problem is population size. Historically, domesticated animals were bred in huge numbers. Early farmers owned many sheep, many goats, many cattle. Large populations allowed humans to select specific traits and gradually reshape entire species. Elephants never existed in those numbers. They're enormous animals, requiring enormous resources. An adult elephant can consume hundreds of pounds of vegetation every day. Keeping large breeding populations would have been extraordinarily expensive. For most societies, capturing a wild elephant was far easier than maintaining generations of captive breeding programs. And then there's another challenge: temperament. Many successful domesticated animals share something important. They tolerate hierarchical social structures. They naturally follow leaders. Horses do this. Sheep do this. Dogs evolved from highly social pack animals. Humans were able to insert themselves into those social systems. Elephants are social too, but their societies operate differently. They form complex family groups led by experienced females. Relationships are deeply personal and highly intelligent. Rather than blindly following authority, elephants often make independent decisions. That intelligence makes them fascinating. It also makes them difficult to control.
An elephant weighing several tons can simply decide it doesn't want to cooperate. And when that happens, there's very little a human can do. Which leads to another uncomfortable reality. Domestication often requires humans to control breeding. Historically, that meant deciding which animals reproduced and which didn't. With elephants, this proved extremely difficult. Captive breeding programs struggled for centuries. Many working elephants rarely reproduced at all. Some populations depended almost entirely on capturing additional wild elephants to replace aging individuals. Without reliable breeding, domestication cannot happen. The process simply stalls. But there may be an even deeper reason, one that has less to do with biology and more to do with economics. Imagine you're living thousands of years ago. You need a powerful animal to transport materials or perform heavy labor. You have two options: spend decades attempting to domesticate elephants, or use horses, oxen, and cattle that already reproduce quickly and are much easier to manage. The choice becomes obvious. Humans tend to follow the path of least resistance, and evolution often rewards efficiency. Why invest enormous resources into creating a domesticated elephant when other animals already solve most practical problems? In many ways, elephants were victims of their own uniqueness. They were useful enough to tame, but not useful enough to justify the immense effort required for domestication. And this reveals something surprising about domesticated animals in general. We often assume humans chose the best animals, but that's not really what happened. The animals that became domesticated were usually the ones that happened to fit a very specific checklist. They matured quickly. They reproduced reliably. They tolerated human control. They adapted to captivity. And they provided enough value to justify the effort. Only a tiny fraction of species satisfy all those conditions. Elephants miss several of them. Not because they're unintelligent, not because they're incapable, but because domestication is less about intelligence than compatibility. A species can be brilliant and still fail the domestication test. In fact, some of the smartest animals on Earth are among the least likely candidates. Dolphins are highly intelligent. So are great apes. Yet neither became domesticated. The barriers are simply too large. And elephants belong in that category. They are intelligent enough to work with humans, but not biologically suited to becoming a domesticated species. Which brings us to something even more interesting.
The fact that elephants were never domesticated may actually be fortunate. Domestication changes animals profoundly. Dogs are very different from wolves. Modern cattle are very different from their wild ancestors. Thousands of years of selective breeding reshape behavior, appearance, and biology. If elephants had undergone the same process, the animals we know today might not exist. Their independence might be reduced. Their societies might be altered. Many of the traits that make elephants extraordinary could have disappeared. Instead, elephants remained something unusual. Partners without becoming possessions. Workers without becoming livestock. Close to human civilization, yet never fully absorbed into it. And perhaps that's why they continue to fascinate us. They occupy a rare middle ground between the wild and the familiar, a place very few species have ever occupied. So why did humans never domesticate elephants? Not because we failed, not because elephants weren't useful, and not because nobody tried. The answer is much simpler. Elephants grow too slowly, reproduce too slowly, cost too much to maintain, and resist the kind of control that domestication requires. They passed some parts of the domestication test, but failed others. And sometimes that's all it takes. The strange thing is that when people look at an elephant, they often see a giant animal. History sees something different. One of the few species intelligent enough to work beside humanity for thousands of years, while remaining, in many ways, completely wild.